Ah, welcome to Ohav Shalom, Messianic Congregation. And this portion of our service is where I stall while people arrive late. And what's happened is over a period of time, everybody realizes that I stall and we started late, so everybody feels it's okay to come late. All right. This is, we have, during this season, we have three special occasions. One was Rosh Hashanah, which really is a false name. The real name is Yom Teruah. The scriptures don't call it the first of the year because it's not. Rosh Hashanah literally means first of the year, and this is not the first of the year. Nisan is the first month of the year in the spring at Passover. The proper name is Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpet. Not Feast of Trumpets, Feast of Trumpet, singular. And then we go for 10 days, and we have the Day of Atonement, which we celebrated last week. And for those two services, they were unusual in that we do a liturgical service. And this week is Sukkot, or what Western countries call Tabernacles. And so I want to spend this welcoming time on explanation about Sukkot, rather than explaining about Messianic Judaism in our congregation. Sukkot is a celebration of the time of the Hebrews in the wilderness with Moses. I get those guys confused, Moses and Charlton Heston. So, you can imagine what this was, where we had so many people coming out of bondage. For 400 years, which there's a generation in the Bible can either be 40 years, 70 years, or 100 years. This was the fourth generation, 400 years in bondage. And that was an experience that helped form the peoplehood of Israel. And I think that perhaps it in that situation from generation to generation, it may have given the people a humility that otherwise wouldn't have been there. Suppose it had been that Joseph continued on, hail fellow, well met in the court of the Pharaoh, and so his descendants, the Jewish people might have gotten a real case on themselves. But you're born in slavery, and you're under a tyrannical yoke. It does something to you, I'm sure, and that might have fashioned the people for the big-time miracles that were to take place. In any case, they wander around for some 40 years, and but there was established worship in a way that had not been done before, and there was a tabernacle. Now, a tabernacle had the form that was to later take place in the temple established by Solomon, David and Solomon, actually. And but the essence of the form of worship were physical accoutrements and procedures that where there was wisdom pointing to the nature of God and the nature of worship, and there's a message in it beyond the actual history and the physical items. Now, I'm going to ask that these be distributed. Let's see, Frank and Bill, why don't you help us out here and just distribute some of these. There's not enough for everybody, but couples can look on. And not everybody wants a copy. You want to help us pass those out? Well, there's not too many people here. Okay, and what you'll see on there is, with your handy-dandy magnifying glass, is a diagram of the temple, of the tabernacle, and the procedures that the high priest would go through as he would enter, and what he would do, and there was the laver and various symbols and a lampstand and so on, and he progressed inwardly into a more intimate situation with God. First, he praises God, and he thanks God, and eventually he gets into the Holy of Holies, which will be to the left of your diagram, and which was done once a year. So all of that is spelled out in the Tanakh, and it foretells of the eventual procedures and ornaments that were to be in the temple. But the basics of the worship was laid out in the tabernacle. Now at the bottom of your diagram, you'll see that if you carefully go through the scriptures as to how did they march forward, was it just a mob? Well, this was organized, actually quite organized, because you had a huge number of people going through. It must have been quite an administrative problem for that number of people. So going through the scriptures, it says where they were located. In what way did they march forward? They had a lot of marching to do, and they had a lot of wagons and possessions and so on. So it laid out where each tribe knew to assemble. And then in the middle, you'll notice the tribe of Levi, who were in charge of the worship and of the tabernacle. It was the Levites that conducted the singing, okay? And you can see the figures that are derived from the scriptures about how many from each tribe assembled. And when you add it up, as you can see in the bottom, it's over 3 million people. And the Bible has a way of not counting women and children. Okay, so you're talking about a very hefty number that the Bible reports marched forward in this formation. In the center are the Levites, and the Levites were in charge of all of the worship, and later when they come into the Promised Land, they were not allocated a parcel of land. Rather, they were distributed among all the other tribes. And they did not get an inheritance of land. Their inheritance was to be in the service of God. So they were supported by the other 11 tribes, and they were distributed in their numbers throughout the other 11 tribes. So that's where you get the 10 lost tribes of Israel, because in Judah, which is the southern tribe, there were Levites in there. And so when that left the northern tribes of Israel, they disintegrated as an identifiable group. So that's so now they're marching forward in this fashion. Another word of explanation I want to make about the holiday before we get started has to do with the traditional side of it. How is it celebrated traditionally in the Jewish community over time? This holiday has equal standing with the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Passover, first fruits, okay, Shavuot or Pentecost. It has equal standing with them, and yet it is very much a neglected holiday on the part of the Jewish people. But not in Israel. In Israel, it's a really big deal, not of equal standing, and so on. So in Israel and in some of the Orthodox communities in the United States, there is a sukkah, and a sukkah is like a tabernacle for each home. And the prescription in the scriptures are that you're supposed to sleep in it and eat in it. It's a place for social gathering, and everybody takes pride in their sukkah, which usually has to have at least 3 sides. You have to be able to see the stars above, so usually there's like palm branches over it. It's intentionally a very flimsy structure made of wood, or possibly there are metal kits that you can buy, and with a cloth that has a hole cut in it for windows, and you put a table and you sleep in there and you eat in there and you invite guests over. Now, in Israel, every family, has their own sukkah. Millions of plural sukkahs or sukkot. And you drive down the street, and everywhere you look, of course, mostly apartments, all bunched up along the coast. But you look on every balcony, and apartments all have balconies in Israel, and they all have balconies for one of the reasons is so that you can have a sukkah. And people, so you go up and down, and you'll see everybody's got, row after row, apartment after apartment, and they all look different. And so in the week preceding, and this goes on in social gatherings for a week, but you can hear the hammer and nails. Everybody's putting up their sukkah. It is a national activity. And everybody wants to show off their handiwork about how swell their particular sukkah looks. When you go up and down the streets on every block, there is a table that for the sale of the symbols of the holiday, which is the etrog and the lulav. Okay, and we're going to get into those in a while as to what they are. So as you're walking down the block, everybody's got their black hat and their black coat on, their pants down past their chin from the temple, and everybody's selling their version, their prescription of the etrog and the lulav. Now, the etrog is a native fruit to Israel, and when I say it's a fruit, you all think it's sweet. It's not. So it's not popular here in the United States because if you taste it, it tastes really lousy. Okay, and you're never going to taste it again. Okay, but nevertheless, these are symbols that are prescribed in the Bible, and we're going to get into that a little later about that. And it's the last of the 7 biblically prescribed holidays of the year. Okay, and you remember that we went through the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Passover, First Fruits, Shavuot, and then there's this long period of time until Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpet. Some people have said, well, wait a minute, we understand the symbolism now in retrospect about the Passover and First Fruits, that was Yeshua, and the Passover of unleavened bread. We get all that. But what this long delay until September and October for these final 3 holidays, what is that? So Yom Teruah, as we focused on, I guess that was almost 3 weeks ago. We explained about that. In order to find out what the meaning of Yom Teruah, what the holiday's about, is you have to become familiar with the New Covenant, and the rabbis simply didn't know what that was about. So they said it was when the earth was formed. Good guess. Because they just didn't know why the purpose of the celebration, so they falsely named it. Now we have 10 days of awe and repentance. And could that have to do with a 1,000-year millennium? Well, we don't know. But that's speculated that there's a parallel between the 10 days of awe and repentance and the 1,000-year millennium. At least the digits are similar. But then Then a week later, there's a Sukkot holiday. What's that about? And we don't know, but we can guess. And one thing that there's pretty generally agreement about is that the holiday of Sukkot has to do with the temporariness of our earthly dwelling, the frailness of our bodies, the frailness of the sukkah, and the frailness of what took place in the wilderness. But then, what's this business with the lulav about? Well, in the scriptures that we're reserving for the message, it talks about different leaves from different trees, and this is taken to mean that it has to do with the world, the future of the world. And one of the scriptures we're going to read a little later on has to do with Zechariah 14, that says that eventually there's coming a day when all the nations will have to send their representatives to Jerusalem or they won't get rain. So, and then there's the sacrificing of 70 animals, one for each of the nations. There's 70 basic nations of the world. The United Nations says 193, but according to the Bible, there's 70 basic nations. Africa's gotten carved up pretty badly. Okay, so the procedure is that during Sukkot, then and now. I mean, Sukkot's been around since the time of the Tabernacle, since the time of Moses. We're talking about a 3,500-year-old holiday. And so there's the stepping forward and the waving this way and the waving that way and the waving this way and the waving that way, which has to do with, it's taken to be that has to do with that this holiday pertains to the world, the future of mankind in the very, very long run after the celebration of trumpets and the Day of Atonement, which would be at the end of the millennium, possibly. So, visualize in Israel, then and now, that you go to the temple or you go to your synagogue, and everybody has this and the lulav, and everybody's waving it, and so it's quite a spectacle. Okay, and so this is the celebration which has continued to this very day. It's amazing that God has been able to preserve this holiday, and what has been how has He preserved it? I mean, how would you go about doing it for thousands of years? I mean, we can't even keep a tradition going sometimes for 2 decades. Well, it's the Scriptures that anchor us to the permanent celebration of this. And there's just some people who never have given up on the Scriptures. And so that is what has kept this holiday alive, so that when these holidays occur, in hindsight, we can see their meaning beyond the historical event. Just like Passover. Now we have understanding of yes, there was a Passover. Yes, there was the leaving of Egypt, but it was foretelling of some future event. So we can look at these other holidays and say they're foretelling of the future. We're going to talk about that later. In the meanwhile, on this holiday also, as well as the Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, there is the blowing of the shofar. I see